So today, the Himalayan Buddhist Society, and then Payu, the Nepalese, and the Gelug Association of Nepal, and Taglung Kagyu tradition, and then Shanga, then Chogorling, the Tibetan Youth Congress, the Tibetan Women's Association, Rizang Association, and also the Gujusum Movement Association, and Ngari Association, and then Bokra, the Mustang Association in Nepal, and the People's Organization of the movement for supporting the Middle Way. These are the 11 different organizations who have requested that they could make this long life offering for me. And since we don't have time to for each and every organization to do separately, we have combined them together here. And today is an auspicious occasion. On this day, this fourth day of the 6th month, the Buddha Shakyamuni, in his Nirmanakaya, supreme Nirmanakaya form, appearing in supreme Nirmanakaya form. In Mahayana, we mentioned 4 Buddha bodies, and Swabhavakaya, Jnanakaya, and Sambhogakaya, and Nirmanakaya. So the Buddha, and so of the Nirmanakaya form, there are different types of Nirmanakaya, such as Nirmanakaya coming in the form of artists and others, which can be seen by different people, even ordinary beings. And because of that, the Buddha appeared like an ordinary person in India at the time as the prince of king. And so he was born in the royal family, and then he was able to see the different forms of suffering of aging, suffering of birth, aging, sickness, and death. But of course, before that, the Buddha himself had already studied the different subjects that were extant in India, the different spiritual traditions, as well as different arts and so forth. In the different religious traditions. And then he renounced his royal life and became an ascetic, and did the 6-year austerity practice. And then still not seeing that was not enough. Whatever he had gone through until then were not enough to purify all negativities. Then he meditated on the selflessness, and he founded this tradition of understanding the selflessness, anatma, and became enlightened under the Bodhi tree. And then, in order to show us example, the followers, example, he showed the process of how, beginning with a person, ordinary person, how one can actually proceed along the path and become enlightened. And then, having experienced the path within himself, he shared his experience with his disciples. And after becoming enlightened, as the Buddha himself has said, that he has found this nectar-like teaching or experience, which is profound, peaceful, and so forth. And this will not be understood by anyone, even if he showed it. Therefore, he refrained from giving teachings and remained in the forest. And then later, he gave the Four Noble Teachings on the Four Noble Truths and to his first 5 human disciples. And so this is the occasion today, corresponding to the first sermon of the Buddha. And so the First Noble Truth, teaching on the First Noble Truth, the first turning of the wheel of the Dharma was given in public. And then, according to Sandhina Mochana Sutra, there are 3 turnings of the wheel of the Dharma. The first one being the First Noble Truth, and the second one being the teaching of the Perfection of Wisdom Sutras. And and then there is the teaching of the third turning of the wheel. And so the first sermon was given in public, but the second turning of the wheel Dharma wasn't given in public, but it was given to a very few select disciples. So in any case, today corresponds to the first sermon of the Buddha, a very auspicious occasion, and therefore we are going to do the long life initiation. So within this process, the long life initiation, there is also the ceremony for taking generating bodhicitta. So many people have gathered here with great interest and dedication. And so you are making this long life offering Tenshuk to me, to the Lama. So the white Thara Yishin Korlo has a special significance for longevity. And therefore, I thought it would be good to do the Tenshuk ritual based on this Yishin Korlo, and also do the long life initiation. So many of you, of course, are familiar with my style of approach. My approach to the teaching, and but maybe there are people who do not know about this. And so, what we are engaged in is the teaching of the Buddha, in particular, the religion, and particular teaching of the Buddha, and particularly we are specifically following the Nalanda tradition of Buddhism. And therefore, the Nalanda masters, even with regard to the teaching of the Buddha itself, what they did was analyze and examine the teaching, and differentiated the teachings between what could be taken literally and those what could not be taken literally. So when they found that certain teachings go against reason, and actually reason undermines these teachings, if you take literally, then they said that they are interpretable or provisional teachings. So if a person, unbiased person, looks at this, the approach of actually checking the words, even the words of the Buddha, they really find admiration in the teaching, in the Buddha. Of course, all the religious traditions of the Buddha in the world are really sacred. For the last over 2 or 3 millennia, there have been these teaching religious traditions, millennia, and all these religious traditions have been really helpful to humanity, and therefore they are worthy of our respect. And the Buddha said that you should check my teaching, and this is unique to the teaching of the Buddha. And the Buddha has said, O monks and scholars, just as the gold is tested by rubbing, cutting, and burning, likewise you should check, examine my teaching, and then accept it, not because you have devotion or reverence to me. And therefore, Master Nagarjuna and other masters have actually done that and said that such and such teachings are provisional and such teachings are definitive. And therefore, the teaching of the Buddha is something that we should take on reason and by investigating through reason and logic. Even people who are atheists, who really do not believe in religious tradition, see the Buddha's teaching to be different from other religious traditions. And so we are following such a religious tradition. And with regard to religion, the meaning of it, the Tibetan term for religion is chö, which means it's a verbal case, meaning transformation, transforming. And the Sanskrit term dharma means to hold or to uphold, meaning protection. So if you look at the reality of the world today, 7 billion people on this earth do not want suffering but want happiness. So although everyone is the same in that respect, generally speaking, the educational system in today's world, the existing education system, is more or less focused on material development alone. And therefore, people are more or less lost in the sensual pleasures. So if they do not have sensual objects and necessities of the sensual objects, then they consider that they do not have full life. Whereas if they have all the sensual pleasures, then they consider to have full life. But even though someone may have all the facilities and all the sensual objects and enjoyments, we can see that they're still not fully happy. And therefore, happiness, although all of us want happiness, but it is not merely being joyous and happy in relation to sensual objects. Even very educated people today, in terms of modern education, find that we are still missing something. Something is missing in our life, and therefore even scientists today find it that we need mental happiness. Inner happiness, to achieve it, we need to know what actually destroys, undermines the happiness, inner happiness, mainly our emotions like attachment, desire, anger, and so forth are the factors which destroy our happiness. And these cannot be ameliorated with some kind of injection or some drugs, or you cannot buy the means to overcome them in the shops, in the markets. But these emotions that we have, the negative emotions of attachment and so forth, anger and so forth, needs to be overcome from within our mind itself and not from without. And therefore, in many countries of the world today, the existing education system is not sufficient. And if you are educated, if you have some knowledge of psychology and about compassion, love, and so forth, people have this feeling. And in America, there are cities which are called City of Compassion and Kindness and so forth. So recently I was in Anaheim, which is called the City of Kindness. And so there are, of course, we are not talking about religion as such, but so many people have this feeling that we are lacking love and compassion. Even medical scientists and people in medical profession see that if you do not have inner happiness or peace of mind, then even your sickness and disease become difficult to cure. So in India, for example, in Delhi, there are people who commit suicide, more number of people committing suicide in the cities than in the villages. In the cities like Delhi. So the reason is quite clear. Of course, people living in the countryside, in the villages, are close to each other and they are able to help one another more. And when someone becomes sick, and therefore there's closer human feeling with one another, and therefore it seems it helps to keep them. And then as villagers and peasants, it seems they have more peace of mind. Whereas people living in the cities actually act out their living by working, and they feel lonely. And when they face difficulties, they do not have anyone to look for help, and therefore become lonely. And so they lose hope. So although the necessities, the day-to-day necessities are better in the cities than the countryside, the farmlands, and still people lack peace of mind. And so happiness is something that you should actually look for within your mind and not outside. So in the last 200 years or so, because of advancement in science and technology, people have actually become so excited to make material development as much as they could. But as they reached quite a high degree of material development and progress, then they have actually seen the disadvantage of just looking for material wealth and so forth alone. And therefore, even people without religion or not have now found that when we should seek inner peace. And many educated people today find that within the educational system we need to include introduction to psychology, to different practices which actually give us more satisfaction, inner satisfaction, and there are scientists, my friends, have done some experiments and their research, and so there are. This is going on, and in Canada, in the British Columbia province, the whole state has actually made official to teach about ethics in the school system. So these are positive changes. Of course, we need material progress, but religion or spirituality is a means to give peace of mind and happiness within. So since 4,000 or 5,000 years in the world, people have found this means to bring about inner peace and happiness within one's mind. And then gradually people also have developed philosophical understandings to back up their faith. And then within the religions there are those theistic and non-theistic religions. And amongst the non-theistic ones, there are those who assert that there is an independent existing self or Atma. So except Buddhism, the rest of the religious traditions assert an Atma or self, whereas Buddhism rejects an independently existing self or an Atma. So when the Buddha gave teaching on the Four Noble Truths, he said this is the truth of suffering for the noble ones, this is the truth of the origin of suffering for the noble ones, and so forth. So these are teachings which became something new in the world at that time, and therefore because of this unique teaching, the Buddha actually refrained from giving teaching in the beginning and said, even if I give this teaching and teach anyone, nobody will be able to understand me. And so from our own experience, people could see that attachment, anger, and so forth are because of our grasping at some independent self, objective independent self, and therefore the Buddha saw this as the root of all our problems and suffering, and therefore understood and realized selflessness and taught it from his own experience as well. And so today there may be over 10 different religious traditions, but the teaching which actually asserts no self theory is only Buddhism. So to overcome this grasping at some independent self, cannot be done by making prayers or going around circumambulation, doing circumambulation around temples and so forth. But it must be overcome by developing the wisdom which sees the opposite of it, that there is no independently existing self. There's no other way to overcome this kind of distorted view of self. And so in the Prajnaparamita teachings also, the teaching itself is known as the perfection of wisdom. Although it teaches other perfections like generosity and morality and so forth, but the whole teaching is named after wisdom, transcendent wisdom, and therefore wisdom is primary in the teaching. And so because of this content, the subject matter of wisdom and the teaching itself is given the name, the title, Perfection of Wisdom. And so wisdom or intelligence is primary. Even the resultant state of Buddhahood, which is in Tibetan called Sangye, or also known as Tamje Khenpa, or omniscience, all-knowing, so which actually emphasizes the aspect of wisdom and intelligence, and therefore Buddhism emphasizes, it is a religion which emphasizes wisdom and intelligence. Of course, the teaching of love, compassion, and other aspects are common to other traditions as well. Of course, the three trainings of morality, concentration, and wisdom are common, even are shared with non-Buddhist traditions as well. But with regard to Buddhism, what is special about it is the understanding of no self. And therefore, on the basis of this, coupled with it, the three trainings are known as the higher trainings. The higher training of morality, higher training of concentration, and higher training of wisdom. So all religious traditions are meant for happiness within, in the mind. So what actually destroys our happiness is mainly our anger, and the antidote to that is love. And so all religious traditions teach this. Whereas in the case of ignorance, the other religious traditions do not teach any antidote about ignorance as such, but Buddhism has teachings to overcome ignorance. And the Dharma, the teaching of the Buddha, is also known as a teaching which is free from attachment. And so with regard to ignorance, there is ignorance, which is the root of all problems. That is ignorance, distorted ignorance, which is a misconception of reality. And therefore, to overcome it, we need to understand selflessness. And therefore, Buddhism becomes unique in the sense of understanding the development of wisdom as well. Of course, whether a religion is best or not depends on individuals. Due to difference in mental dispositions and intellectual capacities of different people. Of course, there we have different religious traditions. So some for some, the theistic religions accepting Creator God is more suitable, whereas for others, it is more suitable to not accept any Creator God. But they still do believe in some independent self. And so, because we have to look at the individual dispositions, mental dispositions, inclination, interest, and so forth of individuals, therefore we cannot say this religion or that religion is the best as such, except in relation to the individuals. And in the teaching of the Buddha itself, we have sometimes the Buddha mentioning as if there is some kind of an independent self. When he mentions that the five aggregates are the loads, and the person is the carrier of the load. Whereas at other times the Buddha also gave teaching whereby he said that there is no external phenomena but the mind. Of course, the most profound philosophical concept and understanding is what the Buddha actually asserted himself. But even if it may be the most profound experience and the teaching, but if it does not help others, then the Buddha didn't teach that most profound teaching or philosophical idea or concept. So because a religion has to be judged, the suitability of to the individuals, we could say to such and such person, this religion is the best, and that religion is the best, and so forth. So if the Buddha were to appear today, he would have given the same kind of approached the disciples accordingly. So philosophically speaking, of course, Buddhism has a very profound understanding of the reality. So I have a friend who said to me very sincerely that the Creator God is full of mercy. But how come there are so many misbehaving people on this earth? So as a reply to this, I said that everything was created by God. So there are people who, while accepting a creator God, that's saying that all humanity, the human beings were created by God, still engage in killing one another. So of course I told this friend that God is all loving. And so he said to me that how come there are so many evil people? So half jokingly, half serious, I said that God created the whole universe and heaven and hell as well. And therefore, if there were nobody to go to hell, then there's no purpose for God to create it. Therefore, since God created hell realm, there are people who must go to hell, and God even gave us free will, I told him. So by using this free will, by misusing the free will, people actually create conditions for themselves to go to hell. And therefore, I told him that if, of course, if there are people who go to hell, then the God's creation of hell is not without any purpose as well, I told him. And then there are religious traditions which say that the self is unchanging, whereas the aggregates, body and mind, are changing. So while accepting such a self, they also assert that we can become liberated. And so this is something inconsistent logically as well. So if the teachings of the Buddha, which actually says that things have some objective existence, were to be taken literally, then things would be, it would be the case that things do not depend on other factors, whereas this is not the case. And therefore we can undermine this literally, taking these teachings literally. Because they go against reason, and because things are dependently originated, and there's no independent existence. Of course, we should respect all religious traditions, but when it comes to philosophical understanding, we should not be biased and attached to one's own tradition and averse others as such, but always remain unbiased, impartial. So the scientists today, of course, there are impartial, there are partial ones as well, but in Japan one time I had a meeting with scientists and who said that there's no consciousness apart from the brain as such. So he was full of sorrow for losing his child. So of course, if you really look deep down, you could see there is a consciousness. But the impartial, unbiased scientists are there who do the analysis and research and experiment without partiality. So if we look at ourselves, of course we become unhappy when we have physical pain. But sometimes, even when you have no physical sickness or discomfort, you're very healthy, but still you can feel disturbed due to certain thought. And so it said that there is a third factor which can actually impact or influence the brain. And this one scientist said it seems to be true, but it cannot. But it's not true. So some unbiased, impartial scientists also, although they are not religious as such, but still believe in rebirth. Therefore, Buddhism has a different approach in terms of understanding the mind and consciousness. And therefore, we can have discussions with scientists on consciousness. So earlier downstairs, there was a report from the Nepalese, the monks and nuns from Nepal, which mentions something between Buddhism and scientists. But I usually make a distinction that it's not Buddhism and science, but what we are dealing with is Buddhist science as it is found in Buddhist literature and modern science. So this is what we are actually discussing on. So the wording here to say Buddhism and discussions between Buddhism and science is wrong. So with scientists, I never discuss about nirvana or rebirth, reincarnation or selflessness and so forth. But with regard to selflessness and dependent origination, today even scientists are actually accepting, especially in terms of quantum physics, where the scientists actually analyze matter. They say that there's nothing objectively existing. Just as we say in Chittamatra philosophy, that if you dissect the matter and external things, you cannot find anything. And therefore the Chittamatra say that things are there, things exist merely as a manifestation of imprints on our mind or consciousness. Whereas in the primary Madhyamaka tradition, nothing whatsoever, external phenomena as well as internal world of minds, have any independent existence. And so I am planning to have a discussion with some Indian quantum physicists, scientists, and so philosophically speaking, Buddhism has the broadest philosophical understanding and also most profound one. Recently, I met a scientist. I met him in America. So from among the quantum physicists, so those who study this kind of idea, who actually say that there's nothing objectively existing, and that I told him that you could actually check whether such a scientist who could actually confirm through their experiment and research that there's nothing objectively existing, if they have less amount of negative emotions like attachment, anger, and so forth, or not. Because these negative emotions usually arise on the basis of some misconception that there is independent existence in things. And one of my scientist friends, so they do check, examine anger, fear, and so forth, but not so much on attachment. So one of my friends, scientists, is about 96 years old now, and he has actually done research on patients of psychiatric patients. And it said that when you become angry, when someone becomes angry, the object of anger looks negative, absolutely negative. But then 90% of that negativeness is actually one's own mental projection. And this is actually what we would, in our text, call the inappropriate mentation. So when we have this kind of discussion, rigorous discussion on details of how negative emotions arise and so forth, of course, we have some common basis for discussion. So if we understand the Buddhism that we have in Tibet, it is profound and vast. But in our society, people, of course, do prayers and read texts, scriptures. And so we could say that if your prayer book is quite worn out, then this means that you have been using it quite a lot. Whereas if it's not worn out, it has remained more or less new, then it's not used much. And then also with regard to our mala, it's the same. Of course, the religion that we have is not based on blind faith, but the way we approach it have been we have approached it blindly. And this is a drawback. So just as we try to make progress in development when we lag behind in terms of material development, likewise, we should make further progress in development in our understanding of the Dharma as well. We cannot say that our parents have been ignorant and they have always remained blind. With blind faith, and therefore we also must do the same, follow in their footsteps. That's not right. Whether you accept the religion or not is up to you as individuals. But once you accept the religion, then you need to understand what kind of religion you are following. So there are people who actually disregard religion, but in order to do so, they must first understand what teachings we have. In India, in the past, there were lots of discussions, arguments back and forth between the Buddhist and non-Buddhist traditions, and within Buddhism also. And then by understanding the position of the other, and the masters were able to actually put forth their arguments and refute those positions of others. So Mao Zedong has once told me that religion is poison. I was very close to him, but he said that. So what he was thinking about is blind faith, religion in terms of how people take it on blind faith. And so because of following on the religions and on blind faith, people have neglected material development as well. And therefore, that is what Mao Zedong saw. And so, just as Mao Zedong, we cannot also say that, of course, Mao Zedong said religion is poison and that we have been following on blind faith, and therefore we must do so. That's not good, right? And therefore we have to understand what the Dharma is about. And so soon after coming into exile, even in the monastic institutions where they did not have any study of philosophy, but they do rituals like tantric rituals of making fire offering, fire puja offering, and so forth. And also we have engaged ourselves in all kinds of exorcism and so forth, but they have not really helped, have they? So a friend of mine was wearing a protection amulet during the upheaval in Tibet. And so when he was injured with a bullet, later on we met in Bodh Gaya, and he said, this amulet, like, so of course Tibet was living in a feudal system, but it was better than the feudal system in China in those old days. But there was corruption as well. Although people followed religion, there was corruption, as one of the songs in the old days in Lhasa actually recounted. And then, of course, we have not been practicing the Dharma well. And people who were giving teachings actually seemed like giving very profound teaching in the beginning, but then in the end, when they were actually found to be looking for some reward or some gift for their teachings, then there are songs which say that we felt sad. And so, if we could actually practice the Dharma sincerely, then of course we would be appreciated and admired by others, and then as individuals, we could also be happy. And therefore, I have urged the monasteries, which traditionally didn't have any study of philosophy, to actually start the study of philosophy, and also the nunneries. I've urged to do this. And then also I have urged the lay people, the common people, to also study the Buddhism. And therefore, as the people have actually taken my word and heeded my word, and in the Tibetan communities, as well as in Ladakh and other Himalayan regions. So, of course, if we cannot do any study of the Dharma, then that's a different matter. And then if we are not allowed to study, then that's also another matter. But the Buddha himself has said that has said we should examine his teaching. And therefore, we have a basis, a teaching which can be actually examined. And then many of the texts written by masters like Nagarjuna and so forth use lots of arguments, logical reasoning, logical arguments, and using the logic of reductio ad absurdum and all. And then later on, Master Thiknaka and Dharmakirti also expanded on the logic and epistemology. And we follow this kind of system followed in Nalanda tradition using logic and reasoning. And not only Tibetans have studied the Buddhism and Buddhist philosophy and through logic and epistemology in the past, we have continued this tradition to this day, and this is something amazing. So this is our treasure. It's a Tibetan treasure as well as we have the potential to make it a world treasure. So many scientists actually admire this method of studying Buddhism that we have through logic and debate, dialectical debate. So one scientist even asked me if we could use this dialectical debate, the method of studying Buddhist philosophy through debate, if it could be used to study other subjects as well. And I said, yes, of course, we have. And in TCV schools, people have started studying science even using dialectical debate. So the way we actually analyze the things through debate in our study of philosophy can be used in other subjects. So with regard to psychology, when we actually establish the points to be considered, we could actually use logic and debate. So first we need to preserve this tradition that we have. And then the Himalayan people are very kind to us, have been very kind to us. In the beginning, when we set up our monastic institutions, we got lots of monks from the Himalayan regions to preserve our tradition, and that has been really helpful. And Yume Tantric College, Lama Omse, Gen Lobsang. And then the abbot of Shartse Monastery. The Gen Lobsang is from Ladakh, and the abbot of Gaden Shartse is from Kelang. And so they have really been good scholars. And then Gaden Tripa, Rizong Rinpoche, also. And Gusho Bagula Rinpoche, the previous Bagula Rinpoche, went to Tibet and entered Drepung Monastery. And one of his teachers was Gyajungne. And this teacher, Gyajungne, of Bagula, scolded Bagula one day. And Bagula Rinpoche actually bowed to him and said, I came from a barbarian country where there was no religion. But today, those regions are now becoming almost like a central region, where in the monasteries you have study of philosophy. And last year, there was a debate presentation in front of me at Lukil Monastery in Ladakh. And then they said that next year it would be held in Petup Monastery of Pakula Rinpoche. And therefore I thought that this year I would go for a short time to Ladakh, although times are quite hectic. So there has been some development and good progress going on in these Trans-Himalayan monasteries, which is very good. I congratulate and thank you. And then the leaders of Ladakh also are very expressed their joy and happiness, saying that the monks who have joined the Tibetan monasteries in South India are really helpful. They could help the monasteries as well as the common people in Ladakh, and so they were praising. And so the political leaders of Ladakh were praising these monks. So of course we as Tibetans have actually become refugees in India, but we have been able to preserve the tradition that we have and be able to actually share it with others and become a good examples. And so Tibetan refugees, because Tibetans became refugees, in the past, of course, Tibetan Buddhism was known as Lamaism, but today the Buddhism has spread to places where people have not even heard of it. And Lamaism, when people talked about Lamaism, they had this strange impression of Buddhism, of Tibet, as if it's like some kind of a spectacle. But today, the people have different view about it. They actually consider it as something from which they can learn, gain knowledge. And so the people from Himalayan regions who are not refugees as such, you should keep in mind how to preserve and promote our teachings, this tradition. And there was a big earthquake in Nepal in the past. So I've heard that at that time this earthquake happened because the Nepalese were actually preparing a war against Tibet. That was what I heard, but that's recently also, sadly, there was this unfortunate incident, the earthquake in Nepal, but the common people as well as monasteries have really helped the poor people in whatever way they could, whether in terms of material help or otherwise. So I'd like to thank you for your service to people. So this has also helped to raise the impression of the monastics in Nepal. So So even if you may have good modern education, if you don't take interest in Buddhism, then that's an indication that you still don't understand the type of Buddhist teaching and tradition we have. Even great, renowned scientists in the world today take interest in our tradition. So if you neglect your own tradition, you'd be ungrateful to yourself. While you may be educated in modern subjects and more. In order to study Buddhism, you don't need to become monastics, monks and nuns. Of course, if you could become monks and nuns, it would be good, really excellent. But even as lay people, it's also important that you become learned. And this is for your own sake as well. So the more you could understand the Dharma well, and actually you could actually confront the problems in life. The more problems you face, the more you could actually ponder on the reasons to overcome those problems better and cope with suffering. During my introduction of Buddhism recently in TCV school, I had asked to actually print the versified text of Lorik, study of mind and awareness. And so I've used that text by Yangchen Gawelotu, which I used as a textbook for my study of Lorik, and it's really good. And so I asked to print and distribute the text.